right, welcome back to yet another webinar by REACHLaw. So today we are looking at Turkey for a change and looking at the current status of the KKDIK regulation, more focusing obviously on the registration part, and then also looking at what needs to be done pertaining to the first registration deadline according to the amended regulation, which is end of 2026. So today it's only me as the expert presenter. My name is Fredrik Johansson. I'm a partner, head of sales at REACHLaw. Have a long background in chemical regulatory compliance and EHS related consultancy and due diligence work, and of course worked a lot also with Turkey related Turkey KKDIK related projects with our clients and so forth. So that's, I consider myself some sort of at least to a certain level, as an expert in the subject. Anyway, today, so some practical information for the webinar. So you can use the chat function to submit questions that you may that may arise during this webinar. I'll try to cover those at the end as much as I can. If they're very specific to your case with very specific information, I suggest please don't submit it in the Q&A. Just send it as an email question to me instead. So I try to cover questions that are of general interest to the public. So if it's very specific to your case, maybe it's not so interesting to everyone. So please send me an email in that case with a question. I'll get back with an answer. Also, you've submitted questions ahead of the webinar, so we'll start with those during the Q&A session back at the end of this presentation. And of course, the recording of this webinar will be made available on our YouTube channel called REACHLaw Talks within a week or so at the latest. And always, please feel free to send us feedback. We appreciate that very much. And if you have done that already for other webinars, thank you very much for that. I really appreciate it. Helps us to become better and focus on topics that are of interest, obviously. So today we have a busy agenda. I hope we will fit it into 60 minutes. It might go over just a bit, but let's see. Anyway, your patience is appreciated. So we'll start with looking at REACHLaw. For those of you who don't know REACHLaw, what we do, then we'll have a quick overview of the KKDIK regulation, so Turkey REACH in other words. So those of you who are in tune with the basics, you can just tune out and get a fresh cup of coffee during that time. Then in section 3, we will look at the current status of the KKDIK regulation. I look at the further developments of the registration process. So this will be the bulk of this presentation, so this section 3. Then we'll look at what it means for the industry, all these changes, more specifically, obviously, the postponement of the registration deadlines, and also quick look at some simple actions that you need to take for the first registration deadline, which is end of 2026. And also covering what to do if you don't have a lead registrant yet for your substance in Turkey, because this is a recurring question. We always get this multiple times during all our webinars on Turkey. So that's why I want to specifically also cover that. Then at the end, we conclude with conclusions and go to the Q&A, and you will find my contact details at the end, obviously. So just a quick run through of REACHLaw. So what we do, so we provide support for companies who need to comply with REACH and REACH-like chemical regulations globally. So obviously this is now also encompassing Turkey REACH, meaning Turkey KKDIK. We call it the Turkey KKDIK regulation. Some call it Turkey REACH as discussed earlier, but we call it Turkey KKDIK for your information. We have offices in several countries for the purpose of supporting local companies complying with these REACH-like chemical regulations, but also functioning as an only representative for companies that are outside of these jurisdictions, so that they can or we as an OR can take care of compliance for their chemical products that they're placing in these jurisdictions. So as a latest newcomer, for those of you who have keen eyes, we are having also an office in Kyiv in Ukraine for Ukraine REACH and CLP purposes. So yet another REACH springing up somewhere in the world, this time a bit closer though. So what we do is we provide support for companies to comply with all these regulatory requirements pertaining to these chemical regulations. EU REACH, Turkey REACH, Turkey KKDIK, UK REACH, Ukraine REACH to be, so we'll discuss that really briefly in just a few slides. And all related compliance activities, from the more demanding authorization and lead registration work to the standard, let's say, co-registration work, and of course, only representation in all these jurisdictions that we saw on our map in the previous slide. So specifically for Turkey, we obviously provide everything that is needed for you and your company to comply with these chemical regulations, so Turkey KKDIK, but also the SEA regulation, meaning Turkey CLP in common language, I guess. So they will obviously are an only representative through our office in Istanbul. So we do pre-registrations, registrations, and lead registration projects. That's constitutes the bulk of the work at the moment, but also SEA notifications, SDS work, consultancy. Later on, we'll look at authorization and so forth, but that it will not be a topic for this webinar. And then of course also certified safety data sheets, which is a very unique requirement for Turkey. We'll have a look at that in one slide where we compare EU REACH and Turkey REACH with each other. And as mentioned in the beginning, we will be putting our videos of this webinar, the recording, on our YouTube channel called REACHLaw Talks. And please go over to YouTube and you will find it there. If you like any of those videos, please help us promote or have these videos become more available to other viewers, maybe of the same subject, by liking and maybe even subscribing to our channel. It is a very niche topic, so I'm not expecting any huge volumes, but still, if you like them, please feel free to subscribe and even give us a thumbs up. Anyway, just a quick update on what's happening around the world pertaining to REACH and REACH-like chemical regulations for the most part. So Turkey KKDIK will be the subject today, so obviously we'll not touch upon that. But other than that, in the UK, we have just gone through the this consultation process pertaining to this alternative transitional registration model, and we're now awaiting the government to come back with conclusions pertaining to that consultation and the changes to the registration process and the information that needs to be submitted and so forth. So we expect these changes to go through and become law next year, but we'll see. With the change in government, things have slightly slowed down, so we'll follow those developments. EU REACH, obviously, we're waiting for the REACH review. In K-REACH, we have a deadline approaching end of this year for the 100 to 1,000 ton substances. We work also on K-REACH for your information if you didn't spot it on our map earlier. Then in India, we work with India BIS regulation, which is not a REACH-like regulation. It's more of a certificate or a standard for certain products and chemical products that needs to be adhered to. But as alluded to earlier, Ukraine REACH is the most recent newcomer to the family, and that is the Ukraine REACH regulation will enter into force 23rd of January next year, and then there will be a pre-registration phase that lasts for 1 year, and then there will be the staggered registration deadlines after that, more or less in sync with Turkish registration deadlines. We will have a specific webinar on Ukraine REACH within a couple of weeks, so stay tuned to our newsletter and our invitation for that. But essentially, it is a copy, more or less, of the EU REACH regulation. So this, if you understand EU REACH, you will understand Ukraine REACH. And the reason why they're having it is obviously because they are seeking membership of the European Union. at some point. So they are harmonizing their legislation with EU. Well, that's enough about other regulations. Let's start focusing on Turkey KKDIK. And before that, just a disclaimer and copyright, of course, that the content of this presentation is, of course, for general information purposes only and is not a substitute for professional consulting. So if you need support with specific topics and any topics for that matter, please contact us separately. So if you take any actions based on this presentation, then it's of course on your own responsibility and so forth. Now I made the lawyers happy. I'm not a lawyer. So, all right, let's dive into a brief overview of the KKDIK regulation. I will just terminate my face view so that you can focus on the slides and to conserve a bit of bandwidth for the folks who are connecting through a poorer line. Let's put it that way. Okay, so let's have a look at the KKDIK regulation. So just the basics. So it is a regulation on chemicals registration, evaluation, authorization, and restriction. And of course, the KKDIK acronym comes from the Turkish name of the regulation. I will not even try to utter it here, but it's already been in force since 2017, and it is very similar to the EU REACH regulation, because at least back in 2017 and before, Turkey was very keen on seeking EU membership, so they were also harmonizing their legislation, including environmental or chemical regulations with the EU, and thus you got the KKDIK regulation. So you can say that it is a copy of EU REACH to a high degree. There are finesse changes and more changes coming, but still very similar in the aim and the technical, let's say, details. The competent authority is the Ministry of Environment, Urbanization and Climate Change, and it is this MOEUCC, which you will see mentioned many times in this presentation. So as with the EU REACH regulation, it has these clauses called no data, no market, which essentially means that you have to provide information about the substances to the designated authorities, according to the KKDIK regulation, to be able to place substances on the Turkish market. So by submitting information, it means pre-registration and eventually registering the substances by the applicable deadlines, which we will talk about in this presentation in some slides. So it is by no means a small scope regulation, because it is affecting more than 10,000 different companies, of course, inside of Turkey, but also outside, who want to and need to comply with the requirements on their chemical products that they're placing on the Turkish market. So just in brief, all substances, unless specifically exempted, are within the scope of the regulation. And then on top of that, you can have substances which are within the scope of the regulation but are exempt from registration requirements, for example, naturally occurring substances and so forth, that are not chemically modified, as an example. We will not go into those details. If you want to have a really deep dive into the basics, I invite you to have a look at some of our earlier webinars that are available on YouTube, where we really go into details. So the basics of registration, and it is a basic requirement, is to register substances that you are manufacturing in Turkey or importing into Turkey as such, or part of mixtures at 1 ton or more per substance. So these have to be first pre-registered and registered then by the applicable registration deadline. So at the moment, it is possible to still pre-register. We call it late pre-register, but it is possible to do that. And the next phase will be to register by these applicable deadlines, registration deadlines, which we will be looking at in just a few slides. The data requirements are dependent on tonnage bands, same as EU, 1 to 10, 10 to 100, 100 to 1,000 tons, and then over 1,000 tons of a substance will require then the most data to be submitted. And you can register in different types of dossier formats, in a way, registration formats. One is the most common is the full substance, meaning you have to submit the most data, FISCEM, tox, ecotox information, depending on the tonnage band of the substance, obviously. But then you can also register as an intermediate, either on site if it's in Turkey, or then you can also, when shipping to Turkey from outside of Turkey, you could also, provided it fulfills certain requirements, you could also register it as a transported isolated intermediate. And these are subject to lesser data requirements, albeit then these strictly controlled conditions SCC must apply. So submissions of the dossiers, and we'll look at the KKS system in just a few slides, but it is done through this KKS system in Turkish language, obviously. So the joint submission concept applies as in EU, REACH, and most other REACH, like chemical regulations, meaning that you have the lead registrant that on behalf of the other registrant submits a core registration data, meaning this information such as FISCEM, tox, ecotox information pertaining to the hazards of the substance and so forth. And this is contained in the lead registrant dossier. And all other ones who are registering the same substance can then join this joint submission by becoming co-registrants. They don't have to submit the full core registration data set again because it's been submitted by the lead. They just refer to the data submitted by the lead as being part of the same joint submission. And all of these dossiers, meaning registration dossiers, are submitted to the Ministry of Environment, Urbanization and Climate Change by the applicable registration deadlines. So we'll look at that in just a few slides. Excuse me. So indeed, you can have 0 to many co-registrants, but you will always have at least one lead registrant per substance that is subject to registration. Good to understand. So what it means is that if you are registering a substance and you are the only one who is placing that substance on the Turkish market, then you will automatically, if you want to register it, become the lead. Subsequent companies joining that joint submission are then co-registrants, if those are available later. So the lead registrant takes upon itself the responsibility to then manage and get organized and cooperate with all the other members of the same SIF, so the Substance Information Exchange Forum, so all the other companies who've pre-registered the same substance. They have to organize themselves, but the lead takes the lead in getting this done and setting up the structures and so forth. On top of that, they also clarify the substance identity, again, together with the other ones, other members of the same Substance Information Exchange Forum. Then they collect and assemble the required data in this dossier and prepare a safety data sheet. And they also have to itemize costs. They have to keep track of all the data that is required. They need to get legitimate access to the information, but they also need to then, at the end of the day, share the costs, meaning issue letter of accesses for companies joining the joint submission, meaning co-registrants, in other words. Besides that, then at the end of the day, when everything is done and dusted, they compile the lead registration dossier. I call it the joint registration dossier, but it's the same thing, then submitting it to the ministry through the KKS, and do that before the applicable registration deadline. And then they, of course, have to keep things up to date for forever, more or less, or as long as there is the KKDIK regulation in place, obviously, and keep records of everything. Then on a co-registrant, on the other hand, then they also have to cooperate in the SIF. They also have to agree on the substance identity. They also have to share data if they have it with the lead, so that that can be taken into account in the joint submission and included in the lead registration dossier. And of course, if you do that, you do not have to pay for that data, or you will get paid for that data. Then share costs, you buy the letter of access, you pay your fair share of the total cost depending on your share of that, which depends on type of registration and of course the tonnage band you are registering. But on top of that, you obviously have to compile your dossier and submit it to the ministry also, and do that ahead of the registration deadline. And then keep things up to date and keep records of everything. And I just included this slide because there was one question on how to essentially see if it's established in the pre-submitted questions. So I just included this slide just to take it a bit further. So essentially, when you have, so how you get from a pre-registration to a registration means that once you, as mentioned already, but quick reminder is in place. So once you pre-register your substance, you will become a member of a pre-CIF. Then once you've agreed on the substance identity with the other members of this pre-CIF, then it becomes a CIF, so a Substance Information Exchange Forum. At this point in time, you may have the lead registrant nomination before or after, but in this slide, I have it afterwards. So once a CIF has, in this slide, has been set up, then you need to elect or select the lead registrant, depending on how many candidates you have for that. Usually not a lot, and then choose how to cooperate in this joint registration. So at this point, the lead registrant then takes the formal lead in this development of the joint registration. Then the lead at the end prepares the lead dossier, shares data, shares costs, asks for data, finds data, legitimate access to data, negotiates that, and so forth, and submits the dossier to the ministry, to the MOECC, so the Ministry of Environment, Urbanization and Climate Change. And then after that, the co-registrants can go ahead and obviously then buy the letter of access and prepare and submit their own dossiers before the applicable registration deadline. And once that's done, then you are a member of a joint submission. So you go from pre-CIF to CIF, eventually ending up in a joint submission, and that is your end goal here with the registration. So obviously, when you are setting up a CIF, if you want more information on that, I again invite you to have a look at some of our earlier webinars on the subject, because they will go into to some level into agreement structures, what needs to be taken into account, and how to set up a letter of access sales, what needs to be taken into account, and so forth. I'm not going into that level of detail in this presentation. So I invite you to have a look at that separately on our YouTube channel, REACHLaw Talks. So registration fees are significantly lower than in the EU for EU REACH purposes, or UK REACH for that matter. They were even lower, but they were increased a year ago, if I recall, quite significantly, but still the costs are very small. So they increase by the annual tonnage of your substance. As mentioned, to prepare all these regulatory dossiers, including submitting a pre-registration, CA notification will not cover that here, but nonetheless, and registrations, so co-registrations and lead registration dossiers, you are doing that in the KKS system, which is a chemical registration system, again in Turkish language, and the acronyms comes from the Turkish name of the system. The system is an online, completely online system, so you are not having separate installments of a Euclid where you work and then upload dossiers to a system, but you work online all the time in this KKS system. So it's much like the for those of you who worked with K-REACH in Korea. It's the idea is the same. You work online all the time. So it's a hybrid system combining essentially EU REACH, REACH IT, iEuclid, and even the KSR tool. To access this system, you would need to be a Turkish citizen, and if you don't have it activated yet, this account, it can take up to 3 weeks to do so. But I think most of you listening have this account already, but if not, just be aware there's a slight delay when you do it, set it up for the first time. Okay, some registration statistics, always interesting. Around more than 250,000 different pre-registrations were submitted back in the day, and still, of course, are still coming in, trickling in. There's no ticker that I can check on any website, so this is information that is gathered from here and there, from different wordings by the ministry and so forth. But what we can see is actually that there are, at the moment, there are 3,340 exactly lead registrants nominated, so for 3,340 different substances. And this statistics is actually from today, so it's very fresh. But this doesn't mean that all these dossiers have been submitted. At the moment, we are estimating around 2,400, 2,500 dossiers to have been submitted before the KKS system submission was turned off. We'll talk about that later on. So this number hasn't actually increased in the last 7 months or so. But anyway, the ministry authorities are looking to have around 15,000 different substances registered under the KKDIK regulation by the end of the phase-in, or this transitional registration phase of the KKDIK regulation. We'll look at the deadline so you understand what that means. Many of the lead registrants currently are only representatives representing, in many cases, also these EU REACH lead registrants. Not in all cases, obviously, but significant amount of EU lead registrants also are registrants for KKDIK purposes. Not one-to-one, but still quite a lot. And this slide is an answer to one of the questions, also actually 2 or was it 3 even questions, pre-submitted questions on what are the differences between the EU REACH regulation and the KKDIK regulation. And here it is, more or less captured in one slide. So you can see that everything is more or less the same. So you have to submit pre-registrations on the EU. Of course, that's not possible anymore. There's an inquiry process in the EU, it applies, but in Turkey, really not in practice. Registration requirements are the same. Polymers are exempted, the same, albeit in the EU we are looking at these polymers requiring a registration as part of this REACH review. It's a REACH 2.0, but we'll see how that pans out in the next couple of years. More data, more volume, more data, the same. Joint registration, the same. We looked only representation, same. PPORD and R&D related exemptions, the same. There are no specific product notifications per se. These are the same requirements. Safety data sheets requirements are the same, except that safety data sheets under KKDIK need to be certified, and all previously under the GBF regulation, but now the KKDIK regulation governs the safety data sheets in Turkey. So you need to, besides authoring them, you have to have a certified person certify this safety data sheet, having this chemical assessment expert qualification, for example. And besides that, certain parts of a lead dossier and dossiers need to be also certified by the same type of people with the same qualification. So those are the biggest differences, I would say, when it comes to like the technical implementation of Turkey KKDIK versus the EU REACH regulation, at least currently. All right, we now go into the crux of this presentation. So for those of you who were getting your coffees, now we will go into more fresh information and relevant for the current status of the registration process and related further developments. So this will be the longest section of this presentation. So if we have a quick historical review or overview, if you will, So the pre-registration, the original pre-registration phase ended essentially by end of 2020. So that meant that in the actual registration process really started off in 2021. But it was quite obvious quite soon that there were not enough lead registrant nominations happening to be able to catch up with all the 15,000 or so different substances that needed a lead registrant to be able to prepare a joint submission and have it submitted by the first registration, by the original registration deadline, which was end of 2023. So it was quite obvious that things are not working properly, and the reasons for the low level of this lead registrant activity, which was the main issue and still is the main issue, is that many of the EU REACH lead registrants who were natural like candidates to become a lead also for Turkey, they were not that interested in the Turkish market themselves, albeit they may have their substances supplied to the Turkish market from other actors downstream of themselves in the supply chain. So, but it really depends on the situation and the interest in the market. This has picked up, but still there are a lot that is not matching up. Furthermore, especially for those who were not accustomed to the processes of a REACH-like chemical regulation and the lead registrant concept and so forth, I think the simple lack of understanding what it means and being afraid to take the lead because it is some sort of a boogeyman for many, it also contributed to companies not stepping up and becoming the lead. And then many companies, of course, were just waiting and seeing and hoping that someone else takes the lead position. But if everyone is just waiting, of course, then nothing happens. And of course, especially for Turkish domestic companies, there was quite a lot of, and still is quite a lot of, general lack of awareness pertaining to the specific requirements of the KKDIK regulation. So all of these have contributed to this low engagement level, especially for the final push to really take the lead position and take the joint submission work forward. So this obviously was not missed by the authorities, and they actually then took up actions to extend the registration deadline. So actually the discussions have been going on for a few years already. So I think it started already in 22, but if I recall, but really in earnest, it started the practical discussions at the authority level pertaining to the extending of the registration deadline. It really started end of second half of last year. So in November, there was a draft legal text produced, and in December, the legal text was then actually submitted for the approval by the president. And then the day before Christmas, the 23rd of December last year, the amendment to the Turkey KKDIK regulation pertaining to the registration deadlines and some other amendments were made official by publishing them on this official gazette. So they became legal text at that point in time. And if you want to have a look at what the text looks like, the amended legal text, so obviously it does not consolidate automatically into the full legal text. So you will see just the amendments here referring to specific articles in the KKDIK regulation that needs to be updated and so forth. So this is the official legal text. You can find it on this link. And I here on the right hand side just used a rough Google translation. So if you want to pause the video then later on and have a look, then you can do that or just do it yourself. So thank you, Google, for the unofficial translation. But at least these translations are quite good nowadays, so you can get the understanding of what they are referring to. But of course, the official version is still the Turkish text version. in this location. So what that meant was that the registration deadlines were postponed with a couple of years, and they were arranged in this staggered approach depending on the hazards of the substance and the tonnage band of the substance. So as with REACH, EU REACH back in the day, the same categories were lumped together. So substances at over 1,000 tons and substances very toxic to the aquatic organisms at 100 tons or more, or then CMR substances category 1 and B at 1 ton or more would have this the registration deadline of 31st of December 2026. So roughly 2 years from now. Then the smaller tonnage band 100 to 1,000, end of 2028, and the smallest tonnage bands, so 1 to 10, 10 to 100 would be end of 2030. So quite some years in the future. And if we look at this visually, we see it like this. So the original deadline was here, which we've already passed, but the amendment came a week, was 8 days before the end of the previous year, according to the previous deadline. So amending the KKDIK legal text so that now we have the deadlines here, 26, 28, and 30 at the end of the day, end of the year. So pre-registrations will continue at the moment. For how long? It depends. Obviously, if you are pre-registering a substance and indicating that it's over 1,000 tons, then you cannot pre-register that beyond this deadline. But these are all questions that we will see the authorities come up with more details, hopefully soon. But we expect this late type of a pre-registration phase to continue like we had for EU REACH, meaning that if you place a substance on the market at, for example, 1 to 10 tons for the first time, let's say here in 2027, then you can late pre-register that maybe at the latest 1 year before the deadline, if they use the same approach as in the EU. But this is all to be determined yet, so don't read that as gospel. So once all the registration deadlines have passed, obviously the same type of an approach as we have for EU REACH, meaning you have to first inquire and then you have to inquire, and then the ministry accepts the inquiry and says that, okay, you have to contact this company as they are the lead registrant for your substance, and then you have to go through the registration process, and only once you've registered and completed that process, you are able to then place it on the Turkish market. But that's still a couple of years in the future, so nothing to worry about at this point in time. But indeed, because of some of the uncertainties pertaining to when is the latest possible time to pre-register, if you haven't done it already, then of course we suggest you do it as soon as possible. But I think most who have had to do it have done it already, meaning pre-registered your substances under KKDIK. So that was the amendments to the deadlines, but it doesn't end there. There were actually other amendments also to the legal text, as of which the following one here is of most interest. The other ones are more like for the lack of a better word, like bookkeeping type of entries. But this one is relevant and interesting. So they added a new sub-paragraph under Article 12, which governs the joint submission of data by multiple registrants under the KKDIK regulation. And this new article, so Article 12.5 or sub-paragraph, sub-article or sub-paragraph 5, whatever you want to call it, it reads as follows: the joint registration process, including lead registrant election and data and cost sharing, shall be carried out in cooperation with the Union of Chambers and Commodity Exchanges of Turkey and relevant institutions and organizations in accordance with the procedures and principles published by the ministry. This is not an official translation, but it captures the zeitgeist, the context of this article in Turkish language. So this means this is quite interesting, because now they're introducing this new entity stakeholder into this joint registration submission process. And it's not entirely clear what this means in practice. What will be this TOB's, for example, a role in the joint submission process? Will there be some sort of a gatekeeper? They have the final say on something, or are they to provide support, or are they there just to ensure compliance with competition law, or are they there to potentially, and this is of course highly speculative, so a bit of warning there, are they there to just maybe give a additional push for Turkish indigenous companies, just to try to get them to become more active and take more lead registration positions going forward? So in a sense, supporting a bit more the domestic KKDIK compliance activities. Who knows? As said, speculation, conjecture, so take it with a huge grain of salt, to be seen. Why I'm having this speculation is because, of course, at the moment, many, I would even say that most leads are actually international companies having ORs in Turkey or their own subsidiaries, who have also been, in many cases, the leads for under EU REACH. So it's in the hands of non-Turkish companies. So maybe there's a will to increase the number of Turkish companies becoming leads, which would make, I guess, some level of sense, to be determined. However, thankfully, there will be a meeting at this TOB with the associations and related assemblies who are members or exist under this Union of Chamber of Union of Chambers and Commodity Exchanges of Turkey. I'll just call it TOB, simpler. And they have a agenda to form a working group for the purpose of just understanding and determining what these new responsibilities that have been provisioned under the KKDIK regulation with the amendment mean in practice. And this meeting is scheduled to happen later this month, maybe being postponed, as quite usually happens in Turkey, but within a month maybe we will know more what this means. And we're following this obviously very closely, because it is if you have been part of the joint submission process, preparing joint submissions, communicating with the potential co-registrants and so forth, it is quite complicated, and now you would add another layer of complication into this process. So really interesting to see what this means in practice. So what did the authorities then, and what are they expecting based on these deadline postponements? So now we're going again back a bit to the postponement of the deadlines. So not Article 12.5, which is interesting, but not something we'll cover anymore here. So the authorities are, with these new deadlines, expecting them for companies to fall in line, actually then take the registration work seriously and then get things done. So they say that they use the additional time effectively, and this is something that they were communicating in the beginning of the year or end of last year. So, well, a while ago already. So this is nothing new. They also said that they are expecting that larger companies will take the lead registrant position proactively and start the joint registration work quickly. Obviously, that is not happening yet, but those were the mandates or the wishes of the authorities. So they don't want these postponements to lead to more delays again. So that was what they communicated roughly half a year ago, a bit more. And also they mentioned that there will be more collaboration between the different ministries, Ministry of Industry and Technology, Trade, and so forth. What this essentially means is a bit unclear. Maybe it's more of a information sharing, maybe to some level also related to enforcement, because in Turkey, many of the enforcement functions can be done by several authorities, not just the Ministry of Environment, Urbanization and Climate Change or the customs. But what is quite interesting at the moment is that as we've all, I think, who are more, let's say, involved in the KKDIK registration work and the process and following the legal developments and so forth, know that now we have the KKS system has been, the submission of dossiers have been disabled for a while, since February this year. And why that is because the ministry, so the authorities, the Ministry of Environment, Urbanization and Climate Change are, together with certain academia, currently reviewing the practicalities of the joint submission process, and this is due to the extension of the deadline. So they have more, they have been given time to figure out more details, more practicalities related to how to perform the joint submission process. And this is very enigmatic. So what this means in practice is not something we know in detail at the moment, but we can deduce that and know that they have been looking at different models for performing the registrations. They have also been looking at the practicalities related to this article 12.5 amendment, meaning this cooperation with these other organizations, this TOB, for example, as discussed. And this project has been funded by United Nations Development Program, so it's a proper project. At the moment, we're not aware of any specific timelines for this project, but it's been running for approximately 7 months or so. Yet we know that there have been some produce of this project, these projects and reports submitted and so forth, but the contents of those reports is not something we don't have the granularity to discuss it in a great detail here. So as mentioned, because of this review, it's been KKS has been disabled, and it remains disabled in the form of not being able to submit registration dossiers. You can pre-register, you can prepare dossiers, you can do everything else except submit these dossiers. So submission has been disabled. So the submissions will continue once the authorities are ready with this review together with the academia on this joint submission process. So what the produce of this review are remains to be determined. But it is our understanding at the moment, at least, that they're not looking to make significant changes to this joint submission process, albeit this remains to be seen. Sometimes things happen quickly, and further delays are not expected at this time. But we've already gotten one amendment to the registration deadlines. Obviously, it is possible that there will be more, but based on current information there, that is not expected. Again, only time will tell. Just to make things slightly more difficult at the ministry's end is that because the ministry of this, the minister of the Ministry of Environment, Urbanization and Climate Change changed last month, in July, and there's also been other changes in the ministry and related units. So all of these upheavals, if you will, are contributing to the slowness of going through this review process together with the academia and really coming out with information on what changes are coming, what do they mean, what are they looking to change, more things or less things. As said, at the moment we are expecting not to be significant changes, but again, time will tell. In any way, there's an ongoing dialogue between obviously the industry and in this case and the authorities, and in this case, of course, the associations are in the forefront. So, for example, the Turkish Chemical Industry Association, the TKSD, is in discussions with the authorities, and of course, purpose is to actually get clarity on the development of this joint submission process. What does it mean? And of course, to a certain level, of course, safeguard the efforts that have already been made by these registrants who've submitted their dossiers according to the previous deadline and were like proactive with this registration effort. So I do not expect the authorities to be saying that those activities have been in vain. On the contrary, I think they will take those into account absolutely. But to be seen. There's also, I think many people have also been aware of this, and there's been murmurs and discussions and whispers and rumors and so forth, even in the questions, that there are some prominent chemical companies lobbying, for lack of a better word, or suggesting to introduce some sort of alternative registration models, like a Swiss model, meaning that, like, for those of you who worked with the chemo regulation in Switzerland, it means that it recognizes the EU REACH registrations, and it means that you would not have to register again in Switzerland, and so forth. But this has, and I know that the authorities have been considering looking at this information, but what this means in practice is to be determined, again, unfortunately. So a lot of things happening, but we are in a bit of a holding pattern at the moment. But at least pertaining to this Article 12.5, this new introduction, at least we will have a meeting fairly soon. So at least we can hopefully get wiser on that particular topic fairly soon. And of course, REACHLaw will be following that subject and keeping you up to date, as well as all these other things that are developing. So if we look at the summary of what's happening now with the KKDIK registrations, so pre-registrations, of course, are still ongoing. It's possible to late pre-register. It is also possible to nominate lead registrations. Those are happening slowly, but it is ongoing at the moment. We see these nominations every now and then. It's possible to prepare your lead dossiers and related activities, but of course you cannot submit it yet because the KKS system submission feature is disabled at the moment. You can issue letter of accesses for those who need, but this process is also fairly slow at the moment, unfortunately. Many people are, as said, in the holding pattern. And of course, this trickles down to co-registrants, meaning that those are also ongoing, but of course you can't submit, but you can buy letter of accesses, but the lack of letter of accesses is hampering that work, because as you recall, we had lead registrants for 3,340 substances, and if there are around 15,000 substances subject to registration, then there's a bit of a gap there that needs to be filled. So we're really waiting for the authorities to come out with more information on this registration process, this review that they're having with academia and so forth. So it's a waiting game and a bit of a meme just to top that off. Sometimes I feel like that, I must admit, especially with the KKDIK regulation. But at the moment, it's really it's a waiting game. But of course, time is running out, so we can't wait forever. We are looking at the registration deadline coming up end of 2026. So that's like, well, what was it, 70 months or so? I think I have a slide on that, so we can look at it, but it goes fast. So we need clarity on the registration process, obviously, and what the authorities are looking to do in practice. So what does this all mean for the industry, and specifically looking obviously at the postponement of the registration deadline? So obviously today it means that you went from this to plus 76 months. I hope I've calculated this correctly, but still 28 months for the first registration deadline, 52 to the next, and 76 to the last one. That was 70 was to the last deadline. So quite a lot of months and time to actually prepare, albeit the first one is quite close, to be honest, especially in these situations where we are essentially waiting for crucial information from the authorities on the potential changes to the registration process, whatever that means. So practical implications, now that we have more time, of course, you have more time to learn, get organized. So for those of you, or for those companies who did not do this already, you now have the time. You can engage and expected, as said, 10,000 plus companies affected by the KKDIK regulation. I think out of this, only like a fairly small amount are currently engaged. There are more time, of course, to select the lead registrant. You can also yourself become a lead registrant. Data access negotiations have been gone through before the postponement of the registration deadlines. It was quite a hectic process, but now there's more time for that, and of course more time to prepare the joint submissions of the lead dossiers and submit it, provided the KKS system is up and running pertaining to submissions. Law negotiations, of course, will be extended, because now we're talking about extending all these discussions until the end of the last deadline, and of course afterwards if there are other companies joining. And cost sharing obviously will be delayed and dragged out, but there will be also additional costs because of the reason of things being dragged out. More times to accrue costs, like management costs pertaining to joint registrations and so forth. And of course, more time for novel substances to be registered and have these tested, properly tested for endpoints for the Turkish market. This is, we know of a couple of cases where this has already happened, meaning these substances have not been registered under EU REACH, but they're looking to be registered under KKDIK. And of course, more time to complicate things. So I think that is human nature. The more time we have, the more complicated we make things. That's why deadlines makes wonders, I think. Okay, and we also will not go into details, but the industry associations will have a more prominent role, especially in the education of companies, coordinating some efforts, and also, I would say, finding suitable lead registrants. So now we'll see how this TOB thing plays in this article 12.5, this new article, what that means, the cooperation in the joint submission, needing these third parties to be involved, like TOB. We'll see, but I think, and I know that some industry associations are taking this seriously and becoming even more involved than they were previously. So that is good. And then for the early movers, what does this mean? So of course, these early movers, meaning who have submitted already, for example, the registration dossiers, they may see this as a bit of a bummer, unjust, favoring the slow and so forth, the postponement of the registration deadlines. That is, of course, there are benefits of becoming an early mover, having done things you know already, you have clarity, you have registered, you are done with the registration requirements, because the registration requirement is not going anywhere. You have control, obviously, of the joint submission process, and in the sense that you've now submitted and prepared everything. This postponement will also likely have the added benefit of now there's more companies going to join you, at least at this during this phase-in phase where you have your deadline still coming up for your case. So that is good. They don't all come at one same time, but trickle. And of course, more things happen closer to each deadline, but still it's more controllable, I would say. And of course, you will have the possibility of managing the process better, because it's been long, we run for a longer time. You have more time to fine-tune your management processes and the dossier development and so forth. It's easier when you're still very coordinated and you have a group of companies who are engaged in the joint submission process, because after the deadlines it will be just a bit more difficult to engage and have, for example, push through updates of a dossier and so forth. So there are certain benefits in that. And of course, you could also justify some seed equity. I call it seed equity for additional efforts due to the extension of the deadlines. But anyway, your number one action is really for the industry is to follow and see and understand what's happening with all this with developments under KKDIK, so you can plan your work properly. So you need to follow these developments closely. And I can see that we're on top of the hour, so we'll go a bit over time. Apologies for that. If you have to go, please go. You can follow the this webinar also on YouTube. Nevertheless, these last sections are short, so I will go through them fairly quickly. So actions to take for the first registration deadline, end of 2026. I'm just keeping it very simple here as actionable points. So again, the first thing is really you need to follow up the developments around the registration process as we've discussed already. And for example, REACHLaw is doing that. We have a LinkedIn account. Please follow us there. You will get news on these developments, and of course please also subscribe to our newsletter if you haven't done so, because you will find get information this way, and of course invites to this webinar. So I think most of you are already subscribers, but if you know someone who is not and you think they should, please feel free to ask them to sign up on our website, reachlaw.fi. And of course make sure that you have a lead registrant for your substance. If you don't have it, you should really consider it becoming yourself. Don't wait. You can already start preparing your submission and collect all the data that is required. You can already communicate with the lead, if there is one, to get at least some preliminary information on when the letter of accesses are available. Do they have some information and data that they still require that you could maybe share, and so forth. You can, as a letter of, like a co-registrant, you can already buy a letter of access provided it is available. This just expedites the process at the end. So having a letter of access ready, purchased, so you have the right to join the joint submission when you want, ahead of the registration deadline. That is also always recommended, not to leave it to the last minute, so to speak. Law fees are unlikely to get cheaper, and if for whatever reason there are more registrants joining the joint submission and buying a letter of access, then of course you will be reimbursed going forward. So there are really no downsides being early in buying a letter of access, I would say. As a co-registrant, of course, you also, before you buy a letter of access, you need to check the CIF agreements and the costs itemizations and make sure that you are really only paying for data that you need. If you own data that is subject to the letter of access, you do not have to pay for that particular itemization. So these are things that you need to check. You have to be diligent, and it takes time. So as with all these compliance activities, it takes time. So better start early than late. And you can do so even though there is still some uncertainty, as we discussed previously with this review that's going on with the joint submission. So you can still start with the work, start preparing, collecting information, compiling even the dossier, even though you cannot submit it yet, buying a letter of access, and so forth. So, and the final thing before going to the conclusions, if there is no lead registrant, this is a common question, that's why we included it here. As we remember, a joint submission always has to have a lead registrant, otherwise it's not a joint submission and it's not possible to register. So if there is no lead, then I suggest you take extraordinary steps to find one, or more likely you should just step up to become the lead registrant yourself. If you're outside of Turkey, then you can do that through your only representative, for example. It is not such a big deal to be a lead registrant, to be honest. It's all the processes have been ironed out, if you will, under EU REACH. For example, when we are doing lead registration dossiers and working on a joint submission, managing that, coordinating that as a lead, for example, as an only representative in Turkey, then we have very robust and clear processes how to take this work forward. So it's not such a boogeyman anymore. It is fairly clear. There are quirks specific to Turkey, but other than that, it is fairly straightforward. It's work, but it's straightforward work. So you should not really be afraid of becoming the lead. It's not that big of a deal because most of the data is available, as said. In most cases, all of the data is available from EU REACH registrations. So it's a matter of negotiating access and coordinating work, assembling a lead dossier, and of course, itemizing costs and determining the cost sharing mechanisms and letter of accesses. But those are standard processes nowadays. So if you are wondering whether if someone else is taking the lead, or you are worried about having no lead in your CIF, pre-CIF, then of course I suggest you become the lead registrant. It's not a big deal. Just get it done, and you can be compensated for your work also in the registration, so in the joint submission. So your work that you spend specifically on this lead registration work together, for example, with REACHLaw, then if we would be your consultant, then all of these are shareable costs. Within reason, obviously. Okay, now we're coming to the conclusion. So, and apologies for the many memes here. I felt like doing those, so just have to bear with me. But anyway, let's look at the conclusions. So the deadlines have now been postponed. So they are end of 2026, 28, and 30, depending on the tonnage band and hazards of the substance. And this is already law. What this means is now you have more time to comply and prepare yourselves. And we highly recommend taking benefit of this additional time and starting the work immediately to inch yourself closer to a registration status. If there's no lead registrant, obviously you have to consider, should I become the lead registrant? And we implore that, yes, please just go ahead and take the lead registrant positions. It is still possible to nominate a lead even though the KKS submission doesn't work. Those are two different things. So nominations are going forward nonetheless. It is also still possible to pre-register, so if you haven't done that, do that as soon as possible. But of course, one of the bigger things now at the moment is the concern related to the review of this ongoing review by the authorities and academia on these practicalities of the registration process. And we are waiting for the conclusions of this review. So it's obviously all of these delays that have now gone for quite some time. If you consider that the delays with the postponement of the deadlines and now the delays with this, it's quite slow going, to be honest. So at the moment, there's a risk of losing some of the momentum. I'm pretty sure it's already been lost to some degree, on the contrary to the goals of the Turkish authorities. But nonetheless, now you should have time now, enough time to prepare for the next deadlines. And the next deadline is, of course, end of 2026. But before that is able to happen, then before you can do that, obviously the KKS system needs to be able to accept these dossier submissions. And of course, we need to know what the authorities are thinking about. So at the moment, it is unfortunately a bit of a waiting game. But in parallel, you can still take actions to do things that you need to, you know, that you still need to do. That is as covered in the presentation already. So as said, follow the developments of the registration process and KKDIK in general. You can do that through REACHLaw, our LinkedIn and newsletter. I recommend both, then you're covered at least. And final point on the conclusions, just this a couple of days ago, news by Bloomberg. I think they reported on it first. I think first it was on Twitter, nowadays X, but then Bloomberg picked it up, and now here's the news that Turkey is looking to join the BRICS alliance, and obviously if that happens, they would probably not become a member of the EU, so, or stay in the NATO, to be determined. But as said, this is political posturing. I think we'll see what happens, but obviously joining BRICS is probably not good news for the EU membership aspirations, which I think have become less over time in Turkey, to be honest. But we'll see. World is an interesting place nowadays. It's a drama on steroids, if you ask me. But okay, that's it. Let's go into some of the questions. And again, apologies for going over time a bit. Those who are familiar with my webinars know that that's quite usual. So let's look at the questions, not the questions pre-submitted. So I'll try to go through these quite quickly, because the interest of saving a bit of time. So first question here was that what are the key differences between the regulations, Turkey KKDIK and the REACH regulation? And we looked at this in this presentation, this slide earlier, so I will just invite you to have a look at this one. We can pause it on YouTube, for example, and investigate. Question number 2, can you explain why some of the substances, for some substances, the law must be bought on 2 platforms? Yeah, this is one of the quirks of Turkey KKDIK. So in many cases, or in many, I would not say many, but in some cases, the data holders are issuing the access to the data that was used for e-reach purposes, like consortia, directly to companies who want to buy access to that data for Turkey purposes. So to buy an access to that data directly from the data holders, you buy a letter of access for that part of the data directly from the data holders. Typically, it would go so that the lead registrant negotiates access on behalf of everyone in the joint submission, but in some cases, as we've seen under Turkey, and we call it case B internally at REACHLaw, we have this case that you have to buy a separate law directly from the data holders outside of Turkey. But it's not enough to just have the one law, then you also have to have a letter of access who covers all the other data and all the work that is done by the lead registrants. So that is why you have 2 letter of accesses. So, and I don't see any reason why some endpoint data holder says that, well, you need to buy a separate law for just my endpoint. So it might be that you have even more laws that you need to buy. But let's hope it doesn't go there. Question on enforcement. Yeah, it's in Turkey they have people who are in charge of enforcement. There are also these other ministries and authorities that are also have the right to inspect and enforce the KKDIK regulation. So it's a bit different than in the EU. But there is enforcement authorities, and how much they are actually looking at enforcement is another question. I know some specific cases where customs have checked some substances for pre-registration coverage, but it is fairly limited at the moment. But you need to, of course, be compliant and be ready for enforcement and these inspections. And then there was another question, improvement on the KKS tool to reach IT level. So it's not quite reach IT as we discussed earlier, but there are continuous updates to the KKS tool every now and then. So it's a continuous process. So when will it be at some specific level of quality or something, that information I'm not privy to, so we do not know. But it is continuous development process, as with most IT tools nowadays. Do you have any suggestions how to handle planned registrations if the EU lead doesn't want to register in Turkey? Well, then we come back again to the case of does your substance have does your substance have a lead registrant in Turkey? If it doesn't, well, if you have an only representative in Turkey, or you are located in Turkey, or an importer, for example, then you should consider becoming the lead yourself. It's not such a big deal, so you can do it. And of course, REACHLaw is happy to help with that, obviously. I hope that answers the question. How will Turkey solve the issue of lead registration dossiers and the information requirements? I think we covered this, so I think this maybe pertains to this, like the review that's going on, or maybe the some referrals to maybe the Swiss model also. But I think maybe it means also the fact that the leads cannot submit dossiers. Maybe there are not enough appointees to become the lead. So that was covered in the presentation already. So I hope that covers it. If you have a specific issue and I did not cover it here in this question, please feel free to send me an email on that. And of course, otherwise also, please feel free to ask questions. KKDIK registrations, are those closed? No, you can still do that. SIF set up in Turkey and regulatory updates. We discussed this, and we looked at this one slide on the SIF setup, so that should be covered. And this was the first question, so I'll go to the next slide with the remaining questions. Turkey's this PCN. This is according to the SEA regulation, it is entering into force beginning of next year, and we will likely have a separate, some sort, maybe a webinar or some bulletin on this to go into more details. So this is poison center notifications. So at the moment, we are not going to details here. We will return to the subject later on in separate communications. Will non-Turkish manufacturers be able to sell to Turkish companies with active registration? So yes, if they're pre-registered, obviously the same substance, and they're covering it as an importer or registered, then yes, provided it's the same substance. Of course, they may need to update tonnage bands and the type of activity from just being, for example, a manufacturer to also cover import. But other than that, not anything beyond the normal compliance activities is required. So you can, yes, if I understood the question correctly. Then there was a question, when will the SVHC list be published? At the moment, there's no specific information available on the timelines for publishing either the this candidate list or, of course, the authorization list. There were some discussions earlier this year that they would be published this year, but considering the let's say delay or this review of the registration process, I think they have their hands full with that. So this will probably be postponed. So we don't have dates on that, unfortunately. So then there was a quick question on CMR, 1 ton CMR category AB, 1A and 1B registrations by the first deadlines. Are these also for self-classified or only substances on these harmonized classification inventories of the SEA regulation, or CLP for that matter? So actually it's both. So if you've self-classified according to a category 1A or B CMR, then you're also in this first deadline. So both. Then the question, do you have any idea when the KKS system will be opened? So as discussed already in this in the slides, actually this is something that once they've gone through this review, then the system will be updated and open again for submissions. So whether that's end of this year, by beginning of next year, to be determined. I'm afraid we do not have clear dates on this. And all these upheavals, changes in the ministry just delays everything. So I'm not expecting any miracles to happen in the next few weeks or so. Then is there a list published for substances with lead registrants? So it's not publicly available, but you can, in the KKS system, if you have access to that, you can go and sort a list of all substances that have a lead registrant, and not only for the ones you have pre-registered, but any substance available on the KKS system. And that way you can export it as an Excel file. And that is why I know, for example, that today there were 3,340 lead registrants nominated. So it is not publicly available, but if you have access to the KKS system, you can get this information. And then the final question, rumors again. Are REACH registrations going to be accepted by Turkish government? We hear rumors, and this is the Swiss model. So I will refrain from speculating here in this webinar, because there's at the moment it is rumors, and what I told earlier is that they are looking and are aware of these Swiss models and improved Swiss models, and are considering and looking into those, but that does not mean that those will go ahead. I know, I said, some companies are, for lack of a better word, lobbying for this sort of approach, but that would really, in my view, mean a significant change of the KKDIK regulation, which would be a bigger hurdle, and I'm not sure that is what the government actually wants to do. So based on our information, that is something they are not looking into, but we are, as said, following this, and of course we'll keep you up to date on the development. So please do feel free to sign up for and follow us on LinkedIn and sign up for a newsletter if you haven't done that already. And again, apologies for going over time. I will just pick a few questions from the chat, because I have not done so yet. So let's see. A lot of questions. Let's see. These we covered about KKS systems. Let's see, when will it be open? Back in 2023, it was allowed to submit CSRs in English. Is that's still the case? Well, now you can't submit anything because the KKS is not open. I do not know. I have to admit, this is the provisions were given for the purpose of meeting the last registration deadline. So if logic dictates, then I would say that they would not accept those anymore for the upcoming registration deadlines. But something to check. We'll come back to this later on in separate webinars or newsletters or so forth. Let's see. Do we have any question? Just give me a second. Yeah, there's a question on what if CMR is then registered after the deadline, then is an inquiry required? So yes, that then an inquiry would be required, because you would not be able to pre-register a CMR after the deadline, first deadline, because they have the deadline coming up end of 2026. So if you are then after that placing a CMR substance on the Turkish market, then and you haven't done a registration, then you would have to go through the inquiry process based on current understanding. And let's see. And thank you for the kind messages from TKSD. Thank you very much. And yeah, then there's a question again on the Swiss portal. I tried to refrain myself, but maybe I need to comment something on that. So the question is, if a Swiss chemo-like regulation is adopted, what will happen to already registered substances? I think they would not take the Swiss model one-on-one. They would keep, for example, likely the joint submission process. You likely would have to submit something so that those who have submitted could already be considered as being registered and would not have to do anything again. That would be like a reasonable expectation. Whether that's true or not, we'll see. But as said, all of this is speculation at the moment, so we'll just have to wait and see what happens. But I'm not expecting significant changes. But as with all things in life, there are always there can always be surprises. So we'll keep an open mind on that. And I'll conclude here. I have a lot of questions here. Let's see if I will cover some of these later on also in other webinars that are coming up on very specific cases pertaining to KKDIK and Ukraine Reach and everything. Just follow our newsletters and you will see what's coming up. So with that, thank you very much for your patience. And again, apologies for going over time as per usual. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to REACHLaw. We're always happy to help. You can contact us at sales@reachlaw.fi or directly contact me, obviously, and you will see my contact details on the slides here. And of course, you'll find them also on our webpage, reachlaw.fi. So thank you again very much for your patience and your attention, and I wish you a very good rest of the day.